Cooper Kupp heads to join Sam Darnold with the Seattle Seahawks. And I think the Seahawks are a better position today than they were at the end of the season. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome into the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the legacy, Louis DiBiase. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers using the Vikings as leverage, talk about the Bengals PR campaign that happened over the weekend, and Cooper Kupp picks the Seattle Seahawks. I think they're in a better spot now than they were before the offseason began. Before we get into all of that, though, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So we get the news over the weekend. Cooper Kupp will be joining the Seattle Seahawks, and my guy Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks broke it all down.
Cooper Kupp is heading back to the state of Washington. The former Eastern Washington Star signing a 3-year, $45 million contract to join the Seahawks just days after being released by the Rams. He'll stay in the NFC West. It's a homecoming of sorts for the former Offensive Player of the Year. The last 3 years have been marred by injuries, missing at least 5 games each of the last 3 years. But he still has been productive when healthy. Last year, Kupp finished with 710 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns in 12 games. If he would have played an entire 17-game season, he would have finished with over 1,000 yards. So he has still been productive. 2022 and 2023 also finished in the top 15 among receivers in yards after the catch per reception. Not a burner, not a guy whose game is predicated on creating separation. With his athleticism, he does it with his mind and his route running savvy. Should be a really good counterpart to put with Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marquez Valdez-Scantling in Clint Kubiak's offense moving forward.
Listen, I think the Seahawks are in a better position now. So they make the trade for DK Metcalf. They have a second-round pick, a third-round pick, Sam Darnold, and Cooper Kupp instead of Geno Smith, DK Metcalf on a 5-year, $150 million contract, and no additional picks. Like, I think you weren't winning a Super Bowl with Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, in my opinion, on the deals that they're about, like Geno Smith's going to get from the Raiders, DK Metcalf got from the Steelers. So to me personally, I don't think they were winning a Super Bowl anyway. I would rather be in the position they're in right now because it provides more flexibility and additional draft capital.
Yeah, I really don't think there is much of a difference. It feels like a very lateral type of transition to me where, yeah, I think in a vacuum, Sam Darnold provides more upside than Geno Smith just because he is younger and could still be an ascending player. And I actually think Cooper Kupp fits that offense really well with a really bad offensive line. Sam Darnold is going to have to get the ball out of his hands fast. So separators like Cooper Kupp, JSN, those guys are going to play in reduced splits, going to play inside. Like, I really do think that fits that offense well. But I think there's a third scenario that Seattle could have pursued where they would have took the more long-term approach at the quarterback position where they don't really go for one of these veteran players and kind of punt on this year. But for the long term, they prioritize the ceiling because I think it's better in a vacuum compared to Geno Smith and Metcalf. But they were a 10-win team last year. Is this going to make them now an 11 to 12-win team that's competing for a championship? I don't think so. So I don't know, Tyler, to me, it feels like it's probably a little bit of a step up, but it still feels pretty lateral to me.
Yeah, I don't think that they've changed the ceiling of their team in any way for certain. I think that this is going to be a year where they kind of just tread water and say, hey, let's be a competitive football team. Let's see if some of these younger guys who we're uncertain about step up and solidify their roles. Let's see exactly what we do well and what we don't do well around Sam Darnold and where we need to improve. Obviously, that offensive line is not something that they need to see games to know needs to improve as well. So I think that's where they're at. But ultimately, even with the 10-win season, They had a really easy schedule early in the year. Like, I remember they beat up on a lot of bad teams with a lot of bad quarterbacks, and they were like 4-0, I think, at one point in time. And it was like,
Everyone thought they were pretenders. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like it was one of those moments where we all knew you're a sheep in wolves clothing. Like, we all can see it. It's no surprise there. So I honestly think that they could even take a step back, maybe win like 7-8 games. I think would not be a surprise for Seattle to not even get to, even though I think the team is probably just as good, if not maybe a touch better. I still think just based on regression of luck that they could end up as a 6, 7, 8 win team.
Right, and so that's the thing to me is I don't get the point. I know Seattle wasn't bad enough to be picking at the top of this year's draft class, and it's not a good deep quarterback class as it is. It's not like last year where there's going to be 6 guys going off the board, and there is like a Bo Nix or Michael Penix type of player in their range. So, and I know you can't just go into every year without a quarterback, but for me, like, and I've said this on our show before, if you're not going for it all, I just don't see the point in making any sort of long-term commitments to the quarterback position for a guy that you don't think is the guy. But I will say Darnold does have an out next year if they want to get out of that contract, if it doesn't work, where they're really not stuck on that deal with that player. So it's worth kicking the tires more so than I would say keeping it going with Geno Smith. Like, I think that experiment was over, and you knew they weren't winning a championship. So if it was between the two outcomes, the two paths to take, they did take the right one. Just in my opinion, I think there was a third one that I would have pursued.
Yeah, there's another option out there. If you want to make it, this or that, then sure. Right. But that's not really what you're limited to out there.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, if Geno Smith wanted to leave, then, I'm sure they just tried to, and they wanted to stay competitive. That's the best they could do. Where I really look at this, I know it's a Seahawks discussion because they get Cooper Kupp, but I think it's going to be really interesting to follow the Seahawks versus the Raiders. I know the Raiders are in a much more difficult division, but with Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers is a solid, number 2, low-end number 2 wide receiver, but solid nonetheless. You have Max Crosby on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe Tyree Wilson takes a step up. There's some things in there. Pete Carroll is a guy who's known to maximize his roster.
Sure.
Right now, who do you think finishes with more wins, the Seahawks or the Raiders?
Right now, I still like Seattle, but let's say the Raiders draft Ashton Genty in the top 10. Now we're talking. That could be something with a last place schedule. They're kind of last year's Seattle, where they beat up on some bad teams, and they have a much better record than you expected. Right now, I would say Seattle, because I really do like the Seahawks defense. I've been a fan of it for years. I love their young secondary, their defensive line, draft picks they've made the last few years. But if they add a Genty to that offense or a legitimate receiver at all, with Bowers, with Geno Smith, now we're talking. I could see the Raiders at some point this year being a better team than Seattle.
Yeah, and one thing to consider, the Raiders' offensive line is not absolutely terrible, okay? Like, Colton Miller has been a solid average to below average, but starting level left tackle. Jackson Powers-Johnson was the belle of the ball last year in the draft. They add Alex Kappa, Dylan Parham. I mean, they have some stuff. They have some stuff to go in there. So, yeah, they add Ashton Genty into that. They could be pretty explosive on offense, and they could at least be a fun team. But with that being said, speaking of a fun team, you want to talk about a team that's not very fun right now? The Cincinnati Bengals. And boy, did they try to pull a PR experiment over the weekend. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining, online shopping, entertainment, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. Stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on entertainment. And now I can budget smarter and save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps at once, I can use Monarch to check my finances, track my spending, and even plan my long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's going to cut down the necks. Look, everybody loves the underdogs, but I love picking favorites. I like backing them with the spreads, the totals, the game props. And with the tournament, there's games happening every day, so there's always something exciting to bet on. And the FanDuel app is simple, it's easy to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com right now and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Louis, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about Cooper Kupp going to the Seattle Seahawks, what that means for the Seahawks, Sam Darnold, and then looking at it from the Las Vegas Raiders angle as well, which will be interesting to do throughout the season. But another thing that's been interesting to watch this offseason has been the Cincinnati Bengals. Signing Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, something that they need to do, something that they've told us that they want to do, but something that still has not happened. And something interesting happened over the weekend. On Friday, all of a sudden, every single national reporter that you have heard of, Pelissero and Rappaport and Schefter and Rossini and Schultz and and even my guy James Rapine from Locked On Bengals, who has been all over this news as well and has his own source information. Everybody all of a sudden just came out and said the same exact thing. And I'll throw it to my guy James from Locked On Bengals to tell you what was said.
The Bengals are closing in on huge contracts for their biggest stars. Hi again, everyone. I'm James Rapine from the Locked On Bengals podcast, and NFL Network was the first to report that the Bengals have made significant progress on contract extensions for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. What does it mean? Well, it means that the Bengals appear to be closing in on contracts for not only two of their biggest stars, but two guys that Joe Burrow has made very, very clear. Pay Jamar, pay T, keep my star receivers in town. And this is huge news. If they can get these deals done, even though it's been a slow week in free agency, these are two obvious moves that they needed to make this offseason. We'll see if they can get them done when they sign on the dotted line. You know we'll have you covered right here on the Locked On Bengals podcast. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Full disclosure, people. It's late on Sunday afternoon. These extensions still have not happened. So if the extensions happen late at night on Sunday night, then whatever. You guys know this is the Bengals should have done this. They needed to get these extensions done. We think it's a good idea. But I'm sorry. I just cannot ignore this the fact that these extensions are not done as of this recording. And the Bengals put out this massive PR push on Friday to every reporter you've ever heard of, local, national, everything. To me, it's just despicable stuff. It's classic Bengals getting everybody hyped up for them to not do what they're saying. And it just makes you wonder why. You know this came from the team. You know that the team reached out to all of the big names at once and was like, hey, here's the update. Why put out this update if you didn't know that those extensions would be announced within like the next 24 hours? Like, why do this to yourself, Cincinnati?
I wonder if they're trying to apply pressure to Chase or Higgins publicly by saying they're close to getting a deal done. So if it doesn't happen, it's we were trying to do this, selfish. Everybody. They're trying to almost like set everyone up. If this doesn't happen, they can be like, well, we tried. We thought we were close. We were even willing to put it out publicly to all these reporters. We were ready to announce it. And if it doesn't happen and Higgins or Chase are gone, like, boom, like maybe it's just some sort of damage control. If that's not what it is, I'm not sure why. Yeah, like you said, you don't just announce it when you make the signings. But this is how the Bengals work. They're one of one in the NFL. They're very old-fashioned. They're very reactive to do things, not proactive. So seeing this doesn't shock me in the slightest. But if they do end up signing both, I think that is the right move over extending a 30-year-old Trey Hendrickson. I've heard some criticism about paying both receivers. I think if this does get done, though, hats off to Cincinnati, because for months now, I was saying I think they're too late on the Higgins front, and it's just not going to happen. So if it does happen, props to the Bengals.
Yeah, I think no matter what happens here, like they need to get those guys signed because it's what they need to do to keep Joe Burrow happy. That's like more important than anything ever right now. But at the end of the day, no matter what happens now, they failed. They absolutely, because they're going to have to give Jamar Chase 8 to 10 more AAV a year.
Same with Higgins, probably. You got to do it early. This is why good teams pay guys in their third. Obviously you can say, well, a team has 5 years of cost-controlled money for a rookie because they got the 5th-year option, but good teams end up paying their rookies normally, Tyler, like year 3, end of year 3, because in a few years, like that, those prices are only going to go up. So, but this is what Cincinnati does, and it's kind of what Dallas does too.
Exactly. I was literally getting ready to say, to me, it's like betting. It's like shorting your best players.
Right.
Like that's what you're doing. You're like,
do you not think Chase is going to be good in a year or two? Like it's going to be worth the price. I promise.
He's top of market now, but if we wait a year, he won't be top of market. And then he won't be the highest paid and we'll save money. That's not how you should hope that things play out, especially with players like T. Higgins and especially Jamar Chase. Like, it's one thing if you don't want to go in on T. Higgins with the injuries and stuff. I can accept that. That would be a tough pill to swallow, but that's one that I can at least. But it's clear that Jamar Chase is going to be one of the greatest receivers in the history of the NFL. So the fact that they didn't do that as soon as they possibly could, it's insanity.
I think they're delaying because, they aren't one of the most lucrative franchises in the league when it comes to liquid cash. I wonder if it's that they're just, year after year, they're delaying those crazy signing bonuses that they're going to have to kind of sign up for initially to bury those big cap hits from all these guys. So maybe that's a part of it. Maybe it's just like they don't have the liquid that some of these other teams do. And we've known that's kind of been the Bengals' track record in the past. I don't know, but no matter what, it is interesting to see Joe Burrow have almost an NBA-like star impact on this. It's been a while since I've seen a quarterback be this vocal, putting pressure on his own team, but he's smart to do it, and he knows what organization he's with, so he knows they need this pressure to get this done.
Yeah, and I think you look at the Bengals. Look, I'm close to that situation. I hear a lot of Bengals stuff. I'm tapped into Bengals information at all times because of what's around me at the end of the day. Right. And Joe Burrow has galvanized the organization into modernizing and building a practice facility, expanding the scouting staff, but it's still nowhere near what you would see in Philly or San Francisco or the Rams, or you know what I mean? So this is one of those moments where the Bengals kind of have to grow. They have to be uncomfortable, do the thing. They have to trade Trey Hendrickson when they don't do trades. And everybody is reporting that the Bengals asking price is ridiculous. And that's why they don't do trades, because they're so scared of getting bamboozled because they can't take the PR. They're such a small organization that they literally cannot take the public pressure. I think that's ultimately, to bring it full circle, why they released this too. So much pressure for them to do something. And they're not just saying, hey, we're about to get these extensions done. They're also saying, hey, we haven't done as much in free agency or to make the team better because we're waiting to do this. So
fair point.
To give themselves so much leeway here when really they just got to do the one thing that they've never wanted to do and shell out all that cash in one offseason and just be a real NFL franchise. If this happens, and you're hearing this right now and it's already happened and it came out, good for the Bengals, but they're fools for not doing this a year earlier.
So, Tyler, you don't think the Mike Gesicki extension is making everybody feel comfortable for the time being and they can sit on that for a while?
Oh, the big TJ Slayton edition, you know what I mean? Like, it's big time here.
No, I think you're spot on with that for sure. And that's the Bengals, and they're kind of cutting off their nose to spite their face. I mean, they're getting in their own way, and that's what they've always done.
Yeah, they're unwilling to modernize and just understand what it takes to get it done. And they're in this position, and you wonder, you say Joe Burrow is the closest thing to an NBA star in the NBA in the NFL with the control he has. I agree with that. But with that, what do NBA stars like to do? Ask for a trade. So you got to wonder, if this thing goes sour, how long until Burrow is maybe saying, I need an organization that will do everything it takes to support me. But with that being said, we got to talk about another quarterback who has quite a bit of demands, Aaron Rodgers, and he's demanding more time right now. All right, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL We talked about Cooper Kupp going to Seattle. We talked about the Bengals extensions or lack of extensions. Who knows what's going on now? But got to go to another situation where who knows is probably the best answer to it. But it's the Aaron Rodgers situation. And we've been talking about the Steelers or the Giants, the Steelers or the Giants, the Steelers or the Giants. But there's a third team that is mentioned in this mix, and it's the Minnesota Vikings. And my guy Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings broke that down.
The rumor mill is trying really hard to link Aaron Rodgers to the Vikings. I don't buy it one bit. So here's the deal. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this because I honestly, it sounds to me, well, it doesn't sound to me. It's been reported very point blank by like Adam Schefter that he's between the Steelers and the Giants. But a lot of people have kind of said some version of like Aaron Rodgers is open to playing in Minnesota. And it's always worded like that. It's always from Aaron Rodgers' perspective. It's always, he would go to Minnesota too if they asked. And hey, he's actually not that, don't rule out Minnesota. He's not that, that's an interesting idea that he would be into. But it's always his perspective. And Adam Schefter went on TV and like point blank was like, yeah, I don't think Minnesota's in on him. But to zoom it way out, boy, is it nice to see Aaron Rodgers, adversary of adversary for more than a decade, go out begging on his knees via Diana Rossini to come to Minnesota.
I mean, look, I'm with Luke on that. I think that this Minnesota stuff is a little bit of nonsense. They're in on JJ McCarthy. You can't go from like being in on JJ McCarthy to we're bringing in Aaron Rodgers to lead the team. Like, it's just not happening. And I think that Rodgers just, he's just trying to get as much money as he can out of the other teams.
Yeah, it makes no sense. I mean, why would you, if you're going to go with your second-year first-round pick, why are you then going to change your plan and go to the 41-year-old quarterback?
Right.
I think it is definitely forced from Rodgers, and it's pretty pathetic. Like, yeah, he wants to be the Vikings quarterback. Well, I'd love to be the Eagles quarterback too, but they're not calling. Just like Minnesota's not calling Aaron Rodgers. I do think at the same time, some people also just really want to see the Brett Favre timeline land perfectly with Aaron Rodgers. So it's kind of a narrative-based thing too. I think people are almost like rooting for it, but I don't think it's realistic at all. And I think they're better off. I think they'll be a better team next year with J.J. McCarthy as their quarterback than they would be if Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know that I agree with you on that one, but let me say this. I think that Minnesota would be better early on with Aaron Rodgers, but at some point you got JJ McCarthy is young and he needs to develop. At some point you gotta just give him that opportunity. And at the end of the day, with JJ McCarthy in the back pocket, there's just no way that Minnesota is going to pay more than a desperate Giants or a desperate Steelers. And quite honestly, I don't know, like, Minnesota's offensive line is overrated. Like, it's a good offensive line, and maybe it's better now with Will Freeze. But, like, their blocking efficiency rating last year was like 30th. It's not like they were like a dominant offensive line. It's not like it was Philly or Detroit or something like that. So, I don't know. I honestly would probably rather go with the Steelers anyway.
That's fair. And if you're the Vikings, you'd rather have your young mobile quarterback than a guy that's 40 and can't escape anymore. So that's why, again, it just doesn't make sense for the Vikings. But yeah, if I'm Rodgers, I'm going Pittsburgh. It really does annoy me, though, that finally I was enjoying that nobody wants Aaron Rodgers. Like, this guy has controlled the narrative for years, and it just, baited everybody and just made everything this long, drawn-out, annoying process. And yet somehow here we are again, and this guy found a way to do this again, where I'm seeing a picture of him reflecting on the beach with his wired headphones because he probably has some belief about what AirPods do to your brain or some stupid garbage. And it's just annoying that he found a way to take control of this thing again, that we've got two pathetic, desperate teams that are like dying to have this guy be their savior. It's just, it does annoy me he found a way to get in this kind of power again.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, when he will actually make his decision. Full disclosure, a lot of behind-the-curtain talk on today's episode, but, like, me and Louie were like, do we wait for Rodgers? Like, do we think the Rodgers news is going to come? And I'm like,
that's the last guy I'm waiting for.
We can't. Yeah,
you can't.
No way. He's making these teams wait. I ain't letting Aaron Rodgers control my day like that.
I was going to say, Tyler, he's controlling the Steelers and the Giants. We can't let him control the Locked On NFL podcast, too.
Yeah, no, you have no power here, Mr. Rodgers. But
That's right.
anyways, with that being said, I'm with you there that I think Minnesota would be better off going with J.J. McCarthy. And we don't know what's at play here. What Minnesota could be actively helping Rodgers' agent in this situation because they have an extension coming up with one of that agent's clients on their team. Like, I think like stuff like that happens so much. As somebody who's a Lakers fan in the NBA, every single free agent, it's like, oh, the Lakers are interested, because you do that and other teams kind of perk up and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, hey, we're not actually interested, but if we say we are, then your shooting guard who is on our team will do better. And
gotta help out Clutch Sports, you know?
Exactly that, you know, and so much of the stuff is agents giving information to reporters in return for things. So I think this is that sort of situation. Ultimately, I get the Steelers, but when do you think Rodgers makes his decision by? Do you think he makes his decision by the 1st of April, by the NFL draft, by the end of this week?
It's got to be before April. I don't know if it's going to be this week, but I would imagine it's before April, because these teams are going to want answers before they start moving forward with the draft process. The Giants have the 3rd overall pick. I mean, if they don't get Aaron Rodgers, let's say Russell Wilson signs with, I don't know, the Cleveland Browns or something. You know what I mean? The Giants are going to have to start switching their focus on quarterback. And I think the same goes for Pittsburgh, whereas Justin Fields is already off, you know, to New York. They got to figure their thing out, and they don't have the 3rd overall pick. So I don't think these teams can afford to wait forever. So he'll drag this out to as far as he can, but I would say it's got to be by the end of March.
I feel so bad for Giants fans because Russell Wilson goes to Cleveland, Aaron Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh. They're going to be left with Joe Flacco. And then the Titans, like Jordan Renan from ESPN New York is already reporting that the Giants feel like their chances to trade for the number 1 pick are dead because the Titans,
I think your team's taking Cam Ward.
Because the Titans fell in love with Cam Ward in his draft visit last Friday. So like the Giants, man, you're in a make or break, get fired or not year. And you got Joe Flacco as your best option. My Lord.
Watch Flacco just save the Giants, though, right? Just continue the legend. I would not be surprised.
No, I would not be surprised either. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. For me, your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, my co-host, the Legacy, Louis DiBiase. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe out there.